The massive spaceship entered the atmosphere of Galvaria with a low, rumbling hum, its sleek silver body cutting through the sky like a knife. Inside the ship, Princess Lyra stood by the large observation window, her eyes fixed on the planet below. Her heart beat faster as the familiar sight of her homeland grew closer, the sprawling green fields, the towering cities, and the magnificent palace where she had once lived. It had been so long since she had seen this world, but it felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. The air was filled with tension as the spaceship descended. For the last several years, Lyra had wandered through the unknown, far away from the royal court, from her mother, Queen Ceres, and from the life she once knew. The exile was meant to be permanent. Galvaria had abandoned her just as her mother had. But she wasn't alone now. By her side were two young human children, Alex and Ethan, both of them sitting quietly in the cabin, staring out the windows with wide, curious eyes. Lyra had found them on Earth, amidst the chaos and destruction that had ravaged the human world. She had saved them, taken them under her protection, and they had become her family. She couldn't leave them behind, not now. They had suffered too much, and now they were her responsibility. The ship landed gently on the palace grounds, and a team of Galvarian guards immediately approached, their eyes filled with suspicion. Lyra stepped out first, followed by Alex and Ethan, who were clinging to her sides like children lost in a strange new world. A silence fell over the courtyard as the royal guards stared at them, unsure of what to do. Lyra, however, walked with the grace of a true royal, her eyes shining with determination. She had made her decision long ago. She would no longer hide. She would return to her mother and face whatever consequences lay ahead. At the entrance of the palace stood Queen Ceres, the ruler of Galvaria and Lyra's mother. She was a tall, imposing woman, her long silver hair flowing like a river of moonlight down her back. Her eyes, however, were cold and filled with years of sorrow and disappointment. She had never forgiven Lyra for leaving, nor had she ever accepted the human children as anything more than a nuisance. "Lyra," the queen said, her voice cool and distant, "I see you have returned, but not alone. Who are these humans?" Lyra stood tall, meeting her mother's gaze with a strength that hadn't been there when she first left. "These are Alex and Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "They are my children now. I couldn't leave them behind." The queen's eyes narrowed. "Children?" She seemed almost disgusted by the idea, her gaze moving quickly between Lyra and the two human boys. "They are not just children, Mother," Lyra replied, her voice firm. "They are special. They've shown me things no one else could. They are the future, not just of Earth, but of Galvaria, too." The queen raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "I have heard enough of your speeches. You've abandoned your responsibilities to this kingdom for years, and now you come back with two humans. How do you expect me to welcome you?" Lyra's face softened. "I never wanted to abandon Galvaria, Mother. I was forced to leave. But these children, these humans, have shown me the truth. They are important, and I will prove it to you." For a long moment, Queen Ceres stood there, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "I do not know what games you are playing, Lyra, but you are back, and I will not let this kingdom fall into chaos because of your misguided compassion for these creatures. You will stay in the palace. The court will decide what to do with you." Lyra nodded, but she knew this would not be an easy battle. The royal court was full of powerful men and women who saw humans as nothing more than primitive beings. She could already feel the judgment and the whispers behind her back, but she couldn't turn back now, not after everything she had been through. As she and the children were led into the palace, Lyra couldn't help but notice how much had changed. The grand halls that had once been filled with the sound of laughter and music now felt empty, as if something was missing. The royal banners hung in silence, their colors faded by time and neglect. The palace seemed just as cold and distant as her mother's gaze. The guards led them to the guest chambers, where Lyra and the children would stay until the royal court could meet. She tried to comfort Alex and Ethan, who looked confused and scared, their eyes darting around the unfamiliar surroundings. The palace was a world away from the small cabin they had lived in during their time on Earth. "Don't worry," Lyra said softly, brushing Ethan's dark hair out of his eyes. "You'll be safe here. We'll make sure of it." Alex, the older of the two, looked up at her. "Do you think your mom will like us?" he asked, his voice small. Lyra smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "She will eventually. People always do, once they understand." The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Lyra tried to meet with her mother, but Queen Ceres was always too busy with her court affairs. The whispers of the court grew louder, and Lyra could feel the eyes of the nobles on her every time she entered a room. They were watching her, judging her, and waiting for her to fail. Despite everything, Lyra remained determined. She spent her time with the children, teaching them about the history of Galvaria, the language, the customs, everything she could think of to help them fit in. She watched with pride as Alex and Ethan learned quickly, showing skills that amazed even the seasoned advisors of the court. Alex, in particular, seemed to have an uncanny ability to grasp complex concepts, his mind sharp and focused. Ethan, though quieter, was strong and brave, his courage shining through even in the most difficult situations. One evening, as Lyra sat in her chambers, a soft knock came at the door. She stood and opened it to find an elderly woman standing there, her face lined with age but still holding a regal air. She was one of the royal advisors, a woman named Tessa who had once been a trusted confidant of Lyra's father before he passed away. "Your Highness," Tessa said with a gentle bow, "I have come to speak with you. The Queen has ordered a meeting with the court tomorrow. You will be expected to explain yourself, and these children." Lyra's heart sank. She had known this moment was coming, but she wasn't ready. "I'm prepared," she replied, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes to show them that I'm not a traitor, that these children are the future." Tessa nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and worry. "Just remember, Your Highness, the court is not kind to those who stray too far from tradition. Be careful." The next morning, Lyra and the children were led to the grand hall, where the royal court had gathered. The large room was filled with the most powerful people in Galvaria, noble families, military leaders, advisors, and diplomats. They all watched as Lyra and the two children entered, their eyes filled with suspicion and curiosity. Queen Ceres sat on her throne, looking down at her daughter with cold, unyielding eyes. "Lyra," she began, her voice echoing throughout the hall. "I've allowed you to return, but I will not tolerate these humans in my court. Explain to us why you have brought them here, and what your intentions are." Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "I have brought them here because they are not just children, and they are not just humans. They are survivors. They are stronger, smarter, and more capable than you realize. I have seen what they can do. They are not the enemy. They are the future." The room fell silent. Even Queen Ceres seemed taken aback by her words. "The future?" the Queen repeated, almost in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that these creatures have a place in the future of Galvaria?" "They do," Lyra said firmly. "And I will prove it to you. Give them a chance." The tension in the room was palpable as the court looked back and forth between the princess and the children. It was clear that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult struggle. Lyra had never felt more out of place in her own kingdom. The golden halls of Galvaria, once a symbol of comfort and power, now felt suffocating. The echoes of whispered conversations followed her wherever she went. People spoke behind her back, some with pity, others with scorn, and still, others with pure confusion. The court was in uproar. Her mother, Queen Ceres, had insisted that Lyra stay in the palace as a guest for the time being, nothing more than a temporary figure, waiting for the court to make its decision about her return. But Lyra had made up her mind. She was not just returning for her sake, but for the future of both Earth and Galvaria. The humans, Alex and Ethan, were not a mistake. They were a symbol of what could be, if only the court could understand. That afternoon, Lyra sat in the garden with Alex and Ethan, surrounded by lush green trees and vibrant flowers, their colors vivid under the bright sun. The children had started to adjust to the new surroundings, but there was still much to learn. Ethan had begun to show an unusual interest in the flowers, carefully examining them with his sharp, curious eyes. Alex, on the other hand, spent much of his time reading the books Lyra had given him, absorbing their contents as though he were starving for knowledge. Lyra smiled as she watched them. The bond between her and the children had grown stronger since their arrival. They were her family, her heart, and she would do everything in her power to protect them. "You're getting better at this," Lyra said as she glanced at Ethan, who was examining a strange blue flower. "But there's more to Galvaria than just plants. You have to understand the people, too." Ethan looked up at her and nodded, though his eyes seemed distant, as if he were lost in thought. He was a quiet boy, often deep in contemplation, his eyes always seeming to see something others couldn't. Alex, in contrast, was lively and full of questions, always eager to learn about the world around him. Alex closed his book with a snap and looked up at Lyra. "Do you think we'll ever be accepted here?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. Lyra paused. She had thought about that very question many times since their arrival. The human children were out of place in this grand city, and the court was relentless in their judgment. But Lyra had never backed down from a challenge before. "I believe they will see you for what you truly are," she said softly. "But it will take time. You must be patient." "I just want to help," Alex murmured. "I want to prove that we belong here." "You already have," Lyra said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You both have shown me things that no one else could." As the days passed, tensions continued to rise within the royal court. Lyra attended more meetings with her mother, who had begun to question her daughter's choices more openly. Lyra's insistence on keeping Alex and Ethan close only seemed to fuel the fire. The Queen had made it clear that she did not trust the humans, no matter how gifted they might be. "Mother, I don't understand why you won't even consider the possibility that these children have something unique to offer," Lyra said. One evening as they sat together in the royal chambers. "Alex and Ethan have the potential to change everything. They've shown abilities that even the greatest minds of Galvaria can't explain." Queen Ceres turned to her daughter, her eyes sharp and cold. "Abilities?" she asked. "Lyra, I do not care about the abilities of these humans. I care about the stability of my kingdom. The people will not accept these gifts. They will see them as threats." Lyra clenched her fists. "Then you underestimate the people of Galvaria. They are not so blind." "Perhaps," the Queen said slowly, "but it is not the people I fear. It is the potential chaos they bring. You've already seen how the court reacts. These children, these humans, will never be more than a distraction, and I will not let them undermine the future of this kingdom." Lyra knew that the Queen was not entirely wrong. The court was restless, and whispers of rebellion had begun to spread. Some of the nobles, the military leaders, and even a few advisors had begun to voice their concerns more openly. There were rumors of a movement that sought to remove Lyra and replace her with someone who could better align with the kingdom's traditional values. Despite her mother's harsh words, Lyra refused to give up. She knew the children were special. They were not just survivors of a dying world, they had the power to reshape both Earth and Galvaria. Lyra's instincts told her that their gifts were not random. They were a sign, but it wasn't just their abilities that made them important. It was the bond they shared with her, a bond that no one could understand unless they had seen it for themselves. Meanwhile, Alex and Ethan were making their own discoveries. Alex had started to communicate more effectively with the royal scholars, impressing them with his intellect. His ability to absorb complex information was nothing short of astounding. Ethan, however, had caught the attention of the royal warriors, his bravery shining through in every training session. He had a natural talent for combat, his movements swift and precise. One afternoon, Lyra watched the two boys from a balcony as they trained with the Galvarian soldiers. Ethan was sparring with one of the warriors, his movements fluid and quick. Despite his small size, he was holding his own, dodging and countering every strike. The soldiers looked on in awe. Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had known they were special, but seeing them in action, witnessing their abilities firsthand, filled her with hope. These children, her children, could make a difference. They were capable of so much more than the Galvarians gave them credit for. That evening, after the training session, Lyra met with the Royal Council to discuss the increasing unrest in the court. There had been more murmurs of rebellion, more meetings behind closed doors. The Queen's grip on power was starting to slip, and Lyra knew that if she didn't act soon, the entire kingdom could fall apart. "We can't continue like this," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "The court is divided, and if we don't find a way to unite them, we risk losing everything. My mother, our queen, won't listen, but we have a chance to make a difference." One of the royal advisors, a middle-aged man named Thalon, looked at her thoughtfully. "You're right, Princess," he said. "There's a growing faction within the court that wants to see the humans gone, and they're gaining influence. But what can we do?" Lyra looked at him, determination in her eyes. "We need to show the people what Alex and Ethan can do. They're not just symbols of the future. They are the future. We can't let fear dictate our actions. We need to unite Galvaria, and we need to do it now." But as Lyra made her plans, she began to uncover troubling information. It seemed that her return wasn't just a political struggle, it was a battle for the very soul of the kingdom. Lyra's spies had reported that there were factions within the royal family itself, plotting to overthrow the queen. There were whispers of a new ruler, someone who would restore Galvaria to its former glory, someone who would put an end to the human contamination. Lyra's heart sank. Her mother had always been a woman of great power, but now, it seemed, she was losing control. Lyra had to act quickly, not just to save herself and her children, but to save the kingdom she had once loved. In the days that followed, Lyra took every opportunity to meet with the common people. She visited the markets, the farms, the schools, and the factories, speaking to those who were too afraid to speak out in the royal court. She wanted to hear their concerns, to understand their fears. And as she did, she began to see a different side of Galvaria, a side that was tired of the old ways, a side that was ready for change. One evening, as she walked through the streets of the capital, Lyra found herself face to face with a young woman, no older than 18, holding a small child in her arms. The woman looked up at Lyra, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "You're the princess, aren't you?" she asked softly. Lyra nodded, surprised by the question. "Yes, I am. Is there something you need?" The woman hesitated before speaking again. "I don't know much about these humans you've brought with you, but I do know this. My brother fought in the war. He died protecting this kingdom. And now all I want is for my child to grow up in a world where we don't have to fear the future. I don't care what you bring to the table, Princess. If they can help us, I'll welcome them. Lyra felt her heart swell with emotion. The woman's words were simple, but they spoke volumes. There were people in Galvaria who were ready for change, ready to embrace the future, no matter what it looked like. She smiled at the woman. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "I promise you, I will make sure your child grows up in a better world. We will make this work." The days were growing shorter, and the tension in the air was thick. Lyra could feel it in every corner of the palace, in every glance exchanged between the nobles and advisors. Queen Ceres had grown more distant, more focused on maintaining control, and her grip on the throne was beginning to falter. The court was divided, and whispers of rebellion were growing louder. Lyra knew that the time had come for a change, not just in the palace, but in the very heart of Galvaria itself. She had always believed in her mother, in the strength of the queen's rule, but the longer she stayed at the palace, the more she saw that Ceres was no longer the leader Galvaria needed. Her views on the humans, on the future, were clouded by fear and pride. Lyra knew she would have to take matters into her own hands if she was to change the fate of both Galvaria and Earth. Lyra spent long hours with Alex and Ethan, teaching them not only the ways of Galvaria, but also preparing them for the challenges ahead. The children had grown stronger since their arrival. Alex was beginning to show a remarkable understanding of Galvarian politics and history, something that was almost unheard of for someone so young. Ethan, while still quieter, was learning the ways of the warriors. His speed and precision in combat had already earned him the respect of the royal guards. But more than that, the children had begun to see each other as more than companions. They had become her true family. One evening, as Lyra sat with Alex and Ethan in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. The future of Galvaria, of Earth, and of the humans rested on her shoulders. "I know you're both scared," Lyra said softly, her gaze on the children. "But you have to trust that this is the right thing. You are not just here to survive. You are here to change everything." Alex, who had been staring at the ground, looked up at her. "What if they don't accept us? What if they never understand why we're here?" Lyra smiled gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "They will. I know it. It will take time, but we will show them the truth. We will show them that the future isn't something to fear. It's something we can all create together." Ethan, who had been silent for a long while, suddenly spoke. "Do you think they'll listen? Really listen?" Lyra turned to him, her eyes softening. "I do. It may not happen overnight, but I believe in the people of Galvaria. I believe they want change, even if they don't realize it yet." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Lyra stood up quickly, her heart racing. It was the royal advisor, Thalon, who had been one of the few people to support her since her return. "Princess," Thalon said as he entered the room, his face grave. "There's something you need to know." Lyra motioned for him to continue, her mind already racing with the possibilities. "It's the court," Thalon continued. "There's talk of a new alliance. Some of the nobles, the military leaders, people who are close to the queen, are planning to remove Ceres from the throne. They believe she's too old, too stuck in the past. They think you could be the future." Lyra's heart sank. The rebellion was real. Her mother's reign was being threatened not just by her own actions, but by the very people who had once supported her. "How soon will this happen?" Lyra asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced with fear. "It's already happening," Thalon said. "Some of the leaders are already making moves. If we don't act quickly, there could be a coup. And you may be the only one who can stop it." Lyra's mind raced. Her mother, the queen, was a proud woman. She would never give up her throne willingly. If the court had already decided to replace her, then it was only a matter of time before the entire kingdom was thrown into chaos. "Thank you, Thalon," Lyra said, her voice calm. "I'll need to speak with Alex and Ethan, I can't do this alone. Thalen nodded and left the room, leaving Lyra with her thoughts. She turned to the children, who were watching her closely. This is it, Lyra said softly. The choice is ours. We can either let the court take over, or we can fight for the future of Galvaria and Earth. Alex stood up, his expression serious. We'll fight, won't we? We've come this far, we can't just give up. Ethan, too, looked determined. We can't let them win. Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Then we fight. We fight for the future, for everyone. The following days were filled with planning, organizing, and making difficult decisions. Lyra knew that it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that it was the only way forward. She couldn't allow Galvaria to fall into the hands of those who would destroy everything she believed in. She gathered her most trusted allies, Thalon, a few of the royal guards who had been loyal to her father, and a small group of commoners who had begun to rally behind her cause. They met in secret, far from the eyes of the Queen and her supporters. We have one chance at this, Lyra said, standing before the group. If we act too soon, we risk everything. But if we wait too long, we lose everything. We need to convince the people of Galvaria that change is not something to fear. It is something we must embrace. Thalon, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. But how do we convince the people? The Queen still has the support of the military, and there are many in the court who will never accept you, especially with the humans by your side. Lyra turned to the children. It's time to show them. It's time to show everyone what Alex and Ethan can do. The plan was simple. They would organize a public demonstration, an event where Alex and Ethan would showcase their unique abilities, proving that they were not the threat everyone believed them to be. It would be a risk, but it was the only way to change the hearts and minds of the people. On the day of the demonstration, the streets of Galvaria were filled with anticipation. People lined the sidewalks, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Word had spread quickly, and the royal guards were on high alert, watching closely for any signs of unrest. Lyra stood at the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the children. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she remained calm, her focus on the task at hand. She could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of everything that had brought her here. This was not just about her future, it was about the future of the kingdom, the future of both Galvaria and Earth. Alex stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was calm, composed, ready. Lyra had never seen him like this before. His confidence was palpable. Ethan, too, stood tall, his gaze unwavering. The two children had become a team, a unit stronger than anything Lyra could have imagined. They were her strength, and they would prove to the people of Galvaria that they were not the threat everyone believed them to be. Lyra raised her hand, signaling for silence. The crowd slowly quieted, their eyes fixed on her. People of Galvaria, she began, her voice strong and clear. I stand before you today with two children, two humans, who will prove that the future of our world is not something to fear. They are the future. And I ask you, as your princess, to open your hearts to them. She turned to Alex and Ethan. Show them what you can do. Alex stepped forward, his hands held out before him. He focused, his brow furrowing slightly, and the ground beneath him began to tremble. The crowd gasped as a large stone platform lifted from the ground, rising into the air as though by magic. The people watched in awe as Alex controlled the stone, moving it in a slow, steady circle above his head. Ethan, not to be outdone, moved to the center of the courtyard. He crouched low, his eyes narrowing in concentration. With a swift movement, he sprinted forward, faster than anyone could have believed, and within seconds, he had crossed the entire courtyard. He stopped in an instant, his body a blur of motion. The crowd stood in stunned silence. It wasn't just the speed or the strength of the children that amazed them, it was the realization that they were not ordinary humans. They were something more, something that could help Galvaria achieve a future beyond anything they had imagined. Lyra looked around at the faces in the crowd. Slowly, the whispers began to fade. People began to nod, some even clapping. The fear that had once gripped them was beginning to melt away. And then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rose. "We'll follow you, Princess. We'll follow you and your children. We believe in the future you've promised us." It was the beginning of something new. A new alliance, a new hope for both Galvaria and Earth. In the days that followed, Lyra's movement gained momentum. More and more people rallied to her cause, and even some of the nobles began to see the truth of her words. The court, once divided and filled with unrest, began to shift in her favor. Queen Ceres, still refusing to accept change, found herself surrounded by those who had once supported her, but now questioned her rule. Lyra had won a small victory, but it was enough to set the wheels in motion. The kingdom was on the edge of something great, something that would change not only the future of Galvaria, but the entire galaxy. But there was still much to be done. The real battle was just beginning.